Hey everyone, welcome to the Question Everything podcast. Today's guest is Mark Nelson. Mark is one of the world's leading scientific researchers when it comes to different types of human bodies. He has questioned everything that mainstream science uses to measure a body's shape and overall health, and it's led to some pretty fascinating and controversial findings. Mark, thank you for joining us in the Question Everything podcast. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you can be here. So, after doing quite a bit of research into the different model that you are promoting to the world when it comes to how we analyze our own bodies, I've noticed that it's debunking a belief that I've had for my entire life, which is I've always believed that being overweight and obese was 100% due to the lack of personal responsibility and lack of discipline. After diving into your work, it seems as if you have a pretty different opinion. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. And I want to state up front very, very clearly that obesity is a very serious disease. It carries with it, high risks, high costs. It leads to other things like heart disease, cancer, gallbladder issues, etc. So, in no way are we saying that obesity isn't a problem. It most certainly is. What we are saying is that the science is actually starting to show that there are different human body shapes that is in direct conflict. It's contrary to anything that you would hear from your doctor when you go and see them in terms of there's only one body type shape, according to mainstream science and medical doctors. It's the shape on the wall behind me. It's the standard body type 1, uh, also known as the standard scientific human body uh, anatomy book body type 1 that you find in any scientifically approved human body anatomy book. That is the only body type that mainstream science and medical doctors accept as being real and valid. So when you go and see your doctor, that's the image that you're being held to. That image with all of the muscle and muscle mass fully developed. And when you are within your safe BMI weight range, that's what you look like. And the only reason that you don't look like that, according to mainstream science and medical doctors, is because you're outside of your safe BMI weight range, because you're eating too many calories per day above your standard BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate, the bare number of calories daily that your body requires. And as soon as you stop eating too many calories daily above your standard BMR, you lose the excess weight and get back down within your safe BMI. You are once again the body type 1, the image on the wall behind me, like you've always been since birth. However, our science and common sense in general deems that that simply is not true. Every human being is not born in a standard body type 1. We have ample data up on our website from folks who state clearly that from day one, they have never been a body type 1. They've always had some form of skinny fat on their body. Skinny fat being cellulite, thin fat, loose skin, saggy skin, crepey skin, or normal weight obesity. And from day one, they've always had some form of skinny fat. They've never looked like the body type 1, no matter how diligent they are with their diet, exercise, and lifestyle, no matter how hard they work with their diet, exercise, and lifestyle to keep the weight off. Even when they're within their safe BMI weight range, they have normal weight obesity, which is too much fat on your body, even within safe BMI, and it carries with it the same general risks as obesity. So the long of the short is the short of the long is that not everyone is born in a body type 1, and our science is showing why, and we explain how. So I'll sort of pause here and see if I'm making sense.
Makes complete sense to me. It's definitely contrarian advice or an opinion that I've been exposed to. I remember when I was going to university, I was studying business, but I took a few nutrition classes, and they were preaching how we use the BMI and just body fat percentage as a whole to dictate the overall health and well being of someone. And I brought the question to the nutritionist, what about a 275 pound, 6'3" linebacker who plays for the NFL. But I was thinking in particular Nick Bosa, who is just absolutely jacked to the gills. It doesn't look like there's really that much body fat on him at all.
But
But
he's a
but he's obese and nearly morbidly obese.
right. And he's not,
And
right?
and then the professor's like, yeah, well, he should. We all know that that's a pretty unsafe body to have, and over a period of time, that can be terrible for their health and can affect long-term health. I'm like, I get that, but football that may not be best for their health,
Right.
but the body type as a whole, if he was just working a 9 to 5 sitting at a desk job all day, looking like that, what's really the problem? And there wasn't really a clear answer for me. So when I first heard of what you are, what you are preaching about, we have so many different body types, and we shouldn't all just be looking at the poster boy body that you have behind you, to say the least. At first, my contrarian self wanted to say, "Oh, here's just another excuse why people can't remain fat. Here's just another excuse why people don't have to change." But it seems as if you're really saying that ever since we've been examining humans, we've been looking at it improperly and try to fit them into a box that doesn't work well for them. Now, when it comes to the body types, after doing research into what you do, there seems to be 4 different body types that you believe is true. The main difference doesn't come from the height of their legs in comparison to ratio of the rest of the body, or it doesn't come from that. It's all mostly around the midsection, and that's where it takes place. Is that the big decider that you can look at as a scientist or as a doctor and be like, oh, you have a body type 3, a body type 2, just by taking a look at that midsection? What is the key thing making a difference between body type 1 and body type 4?
Got it. So first, let me explain that we have, the well-known body types, the endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph, and they aren't based on science. They were never based on science. They were debunked long ago, and yet they are still the standard that if you ask most people, hey, what's your body type? They will give you one of those 3 answers. None of those body types offer you any scientific variables that allow you to define what those body types are. They are no more than arbitrary subjective shapes. So I'm a pear, I'm an apple. Well, why am I a pear? Why am I an apple? Science requires definition so that we can understand something. And if you can't scientifically define it with variables so that we have a true definition for it, then we can't truly define what it is. So we have these arbitrary, subjective, nonsense body types in these names, but we have no real way of saying what is an endomorph, what is an ectomorph. And everyone will say, well, but an ectomorph is skinny, and this, and a mesomorph is skinny, they have more muscle. But if you really boil it down, there are no scientific variables that define any of those body types. And so when I was looking at this, I, of course, was trying to understand why my body type, I was born in a body type 4, and I was trying to figure out why, because I worked so very hard my entire life to keep my BMI, safe. I've most of my life, especially when I was a kid, I was well within my safe BMI weight range, but I had skinny fat all over my body. So I first noticed it when I was 8 years old. I had skinny fat all over where I should have muscle and muscle mass. And it was cellulite and thin fat. And when I would ask the doctor or my parents, they would say, don't worry about it. As you grow, it'll go away and the muscle will grow. And that is not what happened. I grew and more skinny fat grew, and I had fat all over where I should have muscle and muscle mass. And no one wanted to hear otherwise because I was within my safe BMI weight range. But no one argues that I was a weak, scrawny kid, and I was bullied relentlessly because I was such a weak, scrawny kid. And it didn't matter. I was really heavy into sports, and it didn't matter how much I did in terms of cardio. It didn't matter how much I did in terms of weightlifting. It was extremely difficult for me to put any muscle mass on, and it was super easy for me to put on excess fat weight. By the time I was in my teens, I had to quit all competitive sports because if you don't have muscle, like the example that you used uh, previously with the linebacker dude, we know that if you're going to be an NFL player, you're going to have muscle mass, and likely if you're going to be a quarterback or a wide receiver or a running back, any of the talent um, jobs, you have to have a body type 1 because you have to have all that muscle and muscle mass, no less. On top of that, you have to have talent and skill and presence and all these variables, which is why less than 1% of the entire population, probably more like less than 0.1%, are elite athletes. So body type is our body types break things down in terms of vertebrae in relation to muscle and muscle mass and how developed that muscle and muscle mass is. So we know that every vertebra houses a specific set of muscles. We know that any of those muscles genetically can be underdeveloped to whatever degree. And we know that that will directly affect our posture, no less. It also directly affects metabolism because we know that 1 pound of muscle burns 6 calories daily, but 1 pound of skinny fat or fat only burns 2 to 3 calories. So we look at body type in terms of the vertebrae, the 26 vertebrae, the 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 1 sacrum, and 1 coccyx. And we break it down in terms of a body type 1, you have all 26 vertebrae fully developed. And really it's developed because you can be a 9 or a 10 on our scale, and a 10 is fully developed, a 9 is mostly developed, but developed enough to be a body type 1. A body type 2, you have 1 to 8 vertebrae that are developed, which on our scale of 1 to 10 means that you have an 8 or less in terms of muscle mass development. A body type 3 is 9 to 17, and the body type 4 is 18 through 26. And we know that from the cervical down to the coccyx, that all the muscles in the body, the vast majority of the muscles in the body correlate to those 26 vertebrae. So that's how we see body types. I will pause here and see if that's making sense.
So you're telling me that based on the alignment of the vertebrae, that is what dictates what body type you will fall into. Are you saying that it's a genetic thing so that I can't go from being body type 1 in my childhood to body type 4 later on? I will always be body type 1.
You were likely always a body type 2 that looked like a body type 1 in your younger years, for instance. So we have a lot of quizzes up on our site, and we ask folks, when did you first notice the skinny fat on your body, at what age, and when were you a body type 1, a body type 2, a body type 3, and a body type 4. And we have a lot of folks who say, well, I was a body type 1 until I was 12, and then I started to be a body type 2 until I was 18, and then after that I was a body type 3. And we would say that you were always a body type 3, but you were someone like me. I was always a body type 4. I just worked very hard. I did not want to be obese. So I was well aware of the skinny fat on my body very early on at around age 8. And I worked very hard. I was a super active kid. I was always out playing. I wasn't sitting in front of the TV playing video games. I was out playing. I was out doing sports, yada, yada. So I kept all that weight off, but I had skinny fat all over my body. And I was a body type 4 then. And as I got into my college years, it became harder and harder to keep the fat weight off. And by the time I became an adult, I reached nearly 300 pounds. And now I'm back down to my safe BMI weight range, but I still have skinny fat on my body. And I've always had the same skinny fat on my body where I throughout my entire life. And I am 48 now. But when I was young, I was a body type 4. I just didn't get obese at that young age, where we have some people who from day one, they just aren't that aware of their body, and they just don't realize that they have skinny fat and that being obese is a problem, and they just are that. Whereas I was well aware of it. I worked very hard to stay within my safe BMI, and therefore I was a skinny body type 4. So is that making sense?
Definitely does. It's definitely getting in the way of my current belief system on how the world works. Sadly, if I look at the macro scale of it, I don't know if this is just the American in me and how much I love the idea of meritocracy, where anyone can become a millionaire, anyone can accomplish anything they want, anyone can look a certain way. Because it's very much an American ideal. Now that I've traveled the world to some extent, I've noticed that a lot of other places in the world, they fully have come to terms of with how they look and what their place may be in the socioeconomic scale, or what type of partners they're able and willing to attract. Uh,
Right.
and they've come to terms with the things they can change or cannot change, maybe sometimes to a fault, where it becomes as if I'm not going to change from this. It's just how I am. It seemed as if what you are promoting and what your studies and findings have led to is that some people have a proclivity to become more obese over time.
That's correct.
And that's not easy for me to understand because that is contrarian to everything I've ever heard before.
Mhm.
Now, my question to you is, despite it potentially being much more difficult, is it still possible for someone with a body type 4 to achieve a six pack similar to the top athletes in body type 1? Is their
Highly,
ceiling highly unlikely? Is their ceiling
highly
limited?
unlikely.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're a body type 4, it is it. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I am saying that it's highly unlikely because you're missing so much muscle and muscle mass that there is no FDA approved way currently to get rid of any form of skinny fat, including cellulite. It doesn't exist. You can reduce it, but there's no way to get rid of it. No amount of work in the gym. I've spent years upon years in the gym lifting weights diligently. When I was in college, I went down to the gym with my bio type 1 friends, and I followed their routines. I followed their diet. I followed their supplements. I did exactly what they were doing, and they got more and more ripped, looking like the body type 1 that they already were. And no matter what I did, I never had 6 7. Never once in my life have I ever had 6 pack abs. And I did all their exercises and I worked my tail end off. Never looked anything like them. I definitely added a little bit more muscle to my body, but I went from having a sparrow's chest to having a raven's chest. Still a bird chest, just a bigger bird, right? I never looked like those body type 1 dudes. And I literally followed them down to the gym and followed everything that they did, from their diet to their exercise routines to their lifestyle and sleeping, and there's all of it. And I have never achieved to a body type 1. So no, unfortunately, it is genetics. And if you are genetically inclined to being a body type 2, 3, or 4, if you are one of those body types, then the probabilities are that the more skinny fat that you have on your body, the less of a probability that it will be that you will be able to achieve that body type 1 look, because again, there's no FDA approved way to get rid of any form of skinny fat. No amount of work in the gym will ever translate fat into muscle, because that's not how it works. So unfortunately, for all the folks out there who are like me, who want to look like the image on the back wall, it's basically coming to an acceptance of your genetics, excuse me, and that's just how it is. Now, I will say that we have been working on proprietary experimental exercises that that work to I don't want to say translate skinny fat into muscle, because again, that's not how it works, but gradually building muscle where I don't have it, that any of the routines that I've ever done in the gym fail to, but I am actually personally seeing results in terms of adding muscle and muscle mass where I used to have skinny fat, and the skinny fat is now gone. That's about all that I can say on that, because they are experimental and proprietary, and because this is science, I can't just jump out on social media and start saying, do this or that. It's completely irresponsible. But what I am saying is that one of the things that we are looking at in terms of science is how can we genetically change our body so that we can turn skinny fat into muscle. So if folks stay tuned in the coming years, hopefully we will, be able to offer more on that. But that's about all I can say on that. Is that making sense?
Definitely. One thing I want to question also, you mentioned a handful of times something that's 100% genetic. Is this also hereditary? Is this something that if my mother and father were both body type threes, body type fours, there's a very good chance I'll also be?
Right. And the keyword there is a very good chance. It's not guaranteed. We know that genetics can be, crazy, and you can have somebody who two parents who are deaf. They were born deaf, and then their child is, normal hearing. So anything like that is definitely possible, but it definitely raises the probabilities that you will pass this on to your children if you have it. And that's something that people need to be uh, uh, aware of, because if you are, one of the reasons I haven't had kids is because I did not want to pass this on to my kids. Like, I have suffered with this for 48 years, and I could not imagine passing this on to my kids without better understanding it first, and maybe even finding a way to actually quote unquote cure it, so that if I do have kids, then I don't leave them as doomed as I have been with this very difficult life.
When it comes to, let's say, I wouldn't even call it disability because it's definitely not a disability, but a genetic prerequisite that you are given at birth that may never be the ideal image of what society wants bodies to look like. There's two ways we can go upon that. We can, one, try as many exercises as possible, potentially drugs one day, whatever it may be, to make that body look more ideal. Or we can educate the world to know there are different body types, and that is okay to have a body type 4. It's okay to have a body type 3, despite you never looking like the people in the posters, the front of a magazine. It seems as if you were doing both at the moment.
That's right. That is right. We are definitely doing both, because so as the original bi type 4, if I had followed my path out like so many of my family members from childhood into adulthood, I would have been 3, 4, 500 pounds. And no matter how you look at that, you can't call that healthy. You just can't. I'm sorry. Right. And even though it's my genetics, right? And there are plenty of people out there, I'm sure that you've probably seen the show My 600-Pound Life. That's what I was destined to be. And you just can't call that healthy. And there's no way that you can say that, you know, uh, that is an acceptable thing. I'm sorry. And there are people out there who are going to get angry with me and say, but that's my genetics and I can't do anything about it. And it's like, I am the original body type 4. I have done something about it. I have worked very hard to manage my diet, exercise, and lifestyle to keep the weight off. The problem with that is that without muscle and muscle mass, it directly affects your to day life. I couldn't play competitive sports anymore because you can't be an athlete if you don't have muscle. Muscle directly affects your metabolism. It directly affects your ability to, what they call in Hollywood, hold the energy or stand the heat. If you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen. If you have less muscle and muscle mass, you can't stand pressure nearly as well, so you can't go out into the world and reach to the higher levels where there's a lot of pressure just in general. So not having muscle and muscle mass directly affects so many things in your day to day life, including your general health. So we want people to understand what their genetic scientific body type is, and we want the world to be as accepting as possible with that. But on the other hand, we can't simply say, well, if I'm a body type 4, then I can simply be as fat and obese as I want, when that directly affects your health as an individual. It directly affects healthcare costs. It directly affects society in general. So there has to be a middle ground. We have to come to an acceptance of genetic scientific body type and understand that there are many different body types out there, and that it's just accepting that fact and stopping with all the bullying and all the shaming and hating and all that nonsense, because it doesn't do anyone any good whatsoever. But on the other hand, we're talking about health, and we know that health is, about the the healthier that you are, the less fat that you have on your body, right? And so, and that's just a fact. And we know that there are things like the obesity paradox. We know that there is metabolically healthy obese, where there are people who technically, according to their BMI, are considered obese, but all their vital signs are totally normal. Their A1C is normal, their heart rate's normal, their blood pressure is normal, their cholesterol is normal. Everything else about them is normal, but they fall outside of their safe BMI into the overweight or obese columns, and therefore we call them unhealthy. So what we need is science to strengthen and get better at being able to, understand what is our genetic scientific biotype, when is being overweight and obese and unhealthy thing, and when is the obesity paradox and metabolically healthy obese an okay thing. And we don't know any of the answers to any of those questions right now, because again, mainstream science and medical doctors say that the image on the wall behind me is the only safe human body type, because that's how the BMI is calculated. And if you're not that, then you are unhealthy. And the more outside of your safe BMI, the more unhealthy that you are. So much has to change. And that's what we are working on doing, is changing that and making the current body type standards more accurate.
I think it's definitely work worth doing, to say the least. One question I have for you, in particular, body type 4, just because that's kind of the extreme opposite than what we're used to seeing on the poster behind you. When it comes to body type 4, and I believe, now that I'm thinking about it, I can picture a handful of people in my life that I know have this body type, and they've always struggled with this very similar problems that you've gone through when it comes to whether it's a little bit of body dysmorphia or being picked on, whatever it may be. Um, Body type 4, is that just a problem of not being able to shed fat as quickly as a body type 1? Or does it also limit your ability to build muscle? Like, is it just stopping the fat from leaving, or is it also stopping you from building muscles fast as a body type?
It's really about a lack of muscle and muscle mass. So I lacked muscle and muscle mass all over my body. And it was obvious. And it was one of the reasons why I was so easy to be bullied, and why I had to quit sports. Because again, I lacked muscle and muscle mass all over my body. And in place of that muscle and muscle mass was skinny fat. And so wherever you have skinny fat on your body, that increases the probability that you will put excess fat on your body. So not only do I have skinny fat on my body where I should have muscle and muscle mass, but I easily put on fat in those areas where I have skinny fat. And then it becomes much more difficult to get rid of that fat on my body, that excess fat relative to the skinny fat. And even when I do, even when I lose the weight and I get down again inside my safe BMI, there's that old pesky skinny fat again, and I'm well within my safe BMI. But where's the muscle that's supposed to be there, that was always said to be there, was never there? I've always dealt with never being there. I've always dealt with the skinny fat. And yet again, when I go in and see my doctor, and I pointed out, even now, especially back then, but when I pointed out, they just shake their head and say, you're within your safe BMI weight range. There's nothing to worry about. And that's a completely unfair, nonsensical statement, because we know that skinny fat and fat only burn 2 to 3 calories daily. So it directly affects my metabolism, no less. So there's most certainly something to worry about. But I'm being told, don't worry about it. You're within your safe BMI weight range, so don't worry about it. So being a body type 4 is all about not having muscle and muscle mass on your body, where you should have it, but you don't, because of genetics. And that leads to putting on excess muscle, excess fat. and it makes keeping the fat weight off even harder. So there is a place in New York called the Brookhaven Obesity Clinic, and there are stories. There was a show up on the Discovery Health Channel, which I think is now the Oprah Winfrey Channel. But there were numerous shows on some of the patients who were 5, 6, 700 pounds. They were super heavy. They lost the actual weight, and when they were well within their safe BMI weight range, all they had was skinny fat on their body, and you could see it. And you could see the loose and saggy skin. You could see all the skinny fat where they should have muscle and muscle mass, and they did not have muscle and muscle mass. And within 6 months, they had gained most of the weight back. Because that's the problem with a body type 4 is you don't have the muscle and muscle mass on your body. So even if you lose the weight and you get down within your safe BMI, the probabilities of you keeping that weight off are slim to none, because you don't have the muscle to burn the actual calories, and you're likely eating too many calories still above your standard BMR, because the standard BMR fails to calculate in skinny fat. So a body type 4 is all about lacking muscle and muscle mass all over your body.
When it comes to body types, is there a nature perspective to it? Is it like people with body type 4 were more likely to keep that weight on simply because they were from parts of the world where winter was more scarce and food wasn't going to be around all year? How does that take place when it comes to the way we look at our passivization, or where we're simply just ape-like creatures?
Great question. Okay, so and folks are not going to like the answer that I give, but bear in mind that I'm using myself as the example, so hopefully that will help limit the lashback. So most certainly in the evolution of the human being, because life is hard, we have a savings account and we put extra cash in it for when times are lean. The human body has to have a place to store fat, so in lean times it can make it through, right? And so, I've actually been on other podcasts where I've gotten into it with somebody on the podcast where they're like, yeah, but it's just evolution. I just store fat in that area of my body. And it's like, well, okay, I'm not arguing the fact that evolution would allow us to store fat, but if we're talking about a standard body type, then if we look at somebody like a Cristiano Ronaldo, or a Brad Pitt, or a Gisele Bündchen, or any of the known Hollywood stars who are in a body type 1 who don't have any fat on their body whatsoever. And folks will say, well, they have liposuction, et cetera. Well, there's actually no evidence that any of those people that I named have had any of those. But what I'm getting at is there are body type 1s that don't have any of that noticeable fat on it, but they have to store fat somewhere. It's likely inside around the actual organs, so that they do have fat in lean times. There are other body types that have evolved over time to store fat in other places. However, a big part of this is passing on inferior genetics to your offspring. So my father is an obese man, and I love him dearly. He's a good man, but he is an obese man, likely a body type 3. And my mother is a body type 2 who isn't she's never dealt with the obesity like my father has, or my father's side of the family, where we have people who are 3, 4, 500 pounds. So I was passed on weaker genes, and that's what I'm dealing with now. And that's where the evolution of this comes in, is my body type 4 came from the pass down of a mix of inferior genes that created my inferior body. So I now have to suffer through this inferior body in this lifetime and figure this out, which is why I have chosen not to have kids, because I do not wish to pass this on to my kids. And so what I would say is, this is the part, which is why I gave a caveat at the start, is if you're someone like me who has a high proclivity to being obese, if you have a lot of skinny fat on your body, if it runs in your family, then you might want to think twice about having kids. because you're going to pass that on to your kids, and that is going to cause health problems for them in their life, yada yada. And I can already hear all of the lashback saying we can do whatever we want, we can have kids we want, and you most certainly can. But if you're thinking about the health of your kids, then you should always be thinking about your own genes. What are my genes? What am I passing along to my offspring? Maybe for me, it's better that I go and adopt, because there's plenty of kids out in the world who need a home, who are currently without parents. And maybe your path would be better fit adopting, so that you can still have kids, right? But you're not passing along those inferior genes, which greatly raises the probability that you're going to pass those inferior genes on, like I got. And now I have to deal with this extremely difficult life where I have serious health issues. It affects my ability to go out into the world. Just dealing with it's just been a very difficult, hard life that I wouldn't wish on anyone but my worst enemy. And it's because of passing along inferior genes. So yes, it is evolutionary, most certainly, even though that has its limitations. That isn't the end all. Biotypes aren't what they are simply because of that. It's also because of the passing along of inferior genes, which was why we should really give very careful thought to, am I ready to have kids? Do I really want to pass my genes on? Yada yada. And those are questions that nobody asks right now, because it's just, I'm free to have kids if I want, or if you give any thought to it whatsoever, kids just come, right? So what I'm encouraging is people giving more thought to your own genes, understanding them better, and what is the best way forward for you relative to all that information. So is that making sense?
100%. And I've never really looked at it from that viewpoint. Being a scientist like you are, I think you understand the innate desire that humans have to reproduce, and that to make that decision, you are going against neurologically and biologically what your brain and body and mind sole purpose potentially on this planet to be, which would be to survive and reproduce. You are consciously choosing to go against that because you've been able to take a very objective look at yourself and your bloodline for the most part, and realize that although incredible people, when it comes down to the meat vehicle that you have been assigned at birth, whatever it may be, that may not be best for generations to come. That is a very unique decision to make. And I don't think that many people choose to make it. I know a lot of people my age, especially my generation being 23, that they don't want to have kids because of how they believe the world is going, whether it's climate change, whether it's political turmoil, whatever it may be. That is their reason. But to be honest with you, I haven't really, I've thought about this quite a bit, but I haven't ever expressed it to the world. But I think one of the real downfalls when it comes to the developed world that we live in is that survival of the fittest no longer exists.
Right.
Survival of the fittest exists when it comes to how much money you can make, maybe, or some opportunities you may be exposed to that others will not be. But there is no survival of the fittest because our living standards are so high. The chances of you starving or being eaten or killed by something are so minimal that even the bad genes are going to continue.
That's right. And that is why, so we've gotten to this place where if I was born even 100 years earlier, I would not have lived for a very long life, because we didn't have all this. And the survival rates were they were much less, right? So if I was born 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago when we were cavemen, and I was out on the plains in this body, I probably wouldn't have made it to 1 year old, or 5 years old, or I wouldn't have lived long, because I would have been the first person who would have been caught and eaten by a wild animal, because without muscle, I can't run fast. I can't climb trees fast. I can't fight. I can't do anything without that muscle. So I would have been one of the first ones who would have been eaten. So you are right on, and that's it. And let me say too that I am well aware of the state of the world. That also played into why I didn't want to have kids, at least not right now, because the world is a mess and it's greatly overpopulated, and no one wants to recognize that we breached the planet's uh, ability to support human beings like 20 years ago. There are too many people on the planet. We have consumed resources. We have destroyed our oceans. We have done everything to make sure that we destroy ourselves. And everyone's like, "Nah, it ain't that big of a deal. Someone will figure it out." So there's so much going on right now that I think that the only way forward is for the average person to stop and think and look and realize, their genetics matter, your body type matters, the state of the world matters, and before you think about bringing another child into this world, please give all that serious thought, and let's see if we can't make things better. I've got nieces and nephews who would like to live long lives, and right now I'm very worried for their existence because of the state of the world.
I don't know if this is just the optimist in me, but I think I have a very different opinion. And I tend to look for evidence out there that would prove my opinion to be correct and why there are reasons to be optimistic, like all humans do, but I think me in particular. I completely agree with you, though, that what's happened recently has just completely disrupted how the world works. Like I mentioned earlier, survival of the fittest is no longer a thing for humans, at least. It is for every other animal. It's actually increased for almost every other animal, unless we decide to put them in a special little box where nothing will ever touch them, like a endangered species facility, which I'm for, of course, but it's very unlike human nature or just how the world works in general. I don't know. I don't know if it's just me not caring enough, but I have a very optimistic view when it comes to the state of climate change in our environment. That although these problems are definitely worth working on and something that needs to be done, I just have a feeling that it will sort itself out in some way. I also do not feel overpopulation at all. I actually would encourage a lot of people my age to have, if possible, if they're in the position to do it, and if they have great genetics and all those other factors are in place, to have as many kids as possible. Some extent, if
That's
that's
it.
what that's if, yeah, and there's a lot of ifs in there to say the least. And you also have to be a good human, which there seems to be less and less sometimes nowadays.
That's,
But we definitely
that's
have
it.
different opinions on there. But I really just love talking to someone who has come to terms with the fact that they may not be best suited to have kids. Not necessarily because of external, you said it's part of the reason, but just because of their biology. And I've never heard that discussion. I think that's a conversation that, of course, is not politically correct, but I think it kind of needs to be had for the future of humanity. Because I'm like, if this is a question I want to get your perspective on, if this plays out for decades, generations, potentially centuries going forward, if we make it that long, no one blew each other up, or AI didn't come and wipe us all out, whatever it may be, what do you think will happen centuries from now that survival of the fittest is no longer a thing? How will the human race look, and what can be our downfall from that?
Oh, that's a scary question because right now it pretty much boils down to whoever has the most money wins, right? And so essentially, what we're currently moving towards is science is growing more and more in its understanding of human aging. And we now know that human aging is really a disease. It's not something that is inevitable. It's something that we just don't understand. And if we look back in time and we try to understand things better, as a scientist, I believe in the soul, which is a rare thing. But if we look back at the ancient text and we understand what was being said then, Um, we we know that there were events in our past that led to uh, cataclysms and such. Um, and the world changed. And going forward into the future, what I am hoping for is that science is able to wrangle all this, and we can clean out the oceans with science, and we can clean up our health with science, and we can better understand spirit and soul with science. And as we better understand all this with science, we can make the world a better place because of the knowledge that we have gained because of that science. So I believe that the future is bright if we continue forward with science, and we understand what the science says, and we gain more true knowledge. I believe that the future is doomed if we continue forward with the lies and the misinformation and the disinformation and the conspiracy theories and the general nonsense that we see right now everywhere, that is not helping out anything whatsoever. It's only making a few people richer while it's making so many more people more ignorant, and it's just causing problems. So the future is saved by science, and that's where I am optimistic. Is I am very hopeful that your generation has a healthy respect for science, and not an all out science is the only thing, because again, I believe in the soul and spirit, and I realize that I'm in the great minority with that in terms of being a scientist. I actually don't talk about that much because in scientific realms, I already get enough pushback and nonsense about the cutting edge science that I am leading. I get even worse when I talk about spirit and soul. But I don't think that we can move forward as human beings without understanding spirit and soul, without understanding our connection to something more than who and what we are as human beings. But just in terms of our physical bodies, in terms of the planet itself, we have to turn to science to make things better for the future.
I feel like we can have a whole other podcast when it comes to the spirit and soul conversation. That's something I'd be very interested in talking about with you. But yeah, I think
Yep.
that's pretty incredible. Now, Mark, the last question that I ask all my guests, and I want to ask you today is, what is the most important message you feel the world needs to hear right now?
Accept your body type for what it is, accept your genetics for what they are, and figure out what the best diet, exercise, and lifestyle is for you.